This is Metro Week. Our top story, the effort to end homelessness in Tucson. We'll talk to officials who are moving people into stable homes and jobs, and meet a man trying to get back on his feet. Then our Journalists Roundtable analyzes the week's news.
Welcome to Metro Week. I'm Vanessa Barchfield, in for Andrea Kelly. In recent years, there's been a steady drop in homelessness across the nation and in Tucson. We know about that decline thanks to an annual count of homeless people conducted each January. Pam Mosley works with Pima County's division that collects and manages that data. I talked to her about what homeless people are asked during that count and how that information helps address their needs.
We ask questions regarding basic demographics, so their age and things like that. We ask about what health conditions they might have, if they've had issues with substance use. One that's really important is we ask about how long that they've been homeless or if they've had multiple episodes of homelessness. And that helps us also understand more about what people are experiencing in our community and how difficult or easy it is for them to get resolution to their homelessness.
The county ranks homeless people's vulnerability on a scale from 1 to 20, 1 being the least vulnerable and 20 being the most likely to die on the street. Where does the majority of Tucson's homeless population fall on that scale?
Right, so about 55% fall in the middle range. And so that means that if they could receive some temporary rent assistance, maybe access to employment services, they could get their housing stabilized and have the best chance for long-term sustainability in housing. The next area is about 38% in the highest scoring area, and then the remaining, 16% or whatever is in the lower, just kind of get back on track, get a job, or get moved back in temporarily into a place and not needing extra help.
And what kind of services do the most vulnerable homeless people need?
Right, so first of all, they get subsidized rent, so they either can go into a project-based housing, permanent housing, so they can live with other people similar in their situation, or they can pick a place where they'd like to live, anywhere that the rental place would pass inspection, right, for a safe place to live. And then they also get a variety of other services specifically relating to their maybe disability, so mental health support, substance use treatment and things like that. And then they also get other peer support and things like that, with the goal in mind that they can stabilize in their housing and live there as long as they want to.
And what can be done to help people that don't want to end their homelessness?
You know, I don't believe anybody doesn't want to end their homelessness. Like I said, it's a double negative. But I think everyone really wants to have a safe place to live. It's not the same for each person, just like normal isn't the same for each person. And so, but I really believe everybody really wants a safe place to live.
Do you think that perceptions of homelessness have shifted over the past few years?
I do. I think that the community is becoming more aware of homelessness as an issue. Whether it's a positive perception of it or a negative, it's certainly gotten a lot more awareness in our community. And I see more people coming to the table to want to solve issues to help people that are experiencing homelessness.
We've heard a lot about, of course, homeless vets. Is there another demographic group that you think is particularly vulnerable and really needs to be addressed next?
You know, our next target population is those that are chronically homeless. To be designated as chronically homeless, there are 2 criteria primarily. Length of homelessness, so being homeless for 12 months or longer, or having 4 or more episodes over 3 years that total 12 months. And then also having a disabling condition that seriously affects a person's life. So having substance use issues or having mental health issues. And so that's the population that we really are going to be focusing very heavily on later on this year.
Next, an interview with Stephen Nelson, who runs a county center that helps homeless people find jobs. Nelson's been working with the homeless for 25 years. Steve, 10 years ago, there were more than 2,000 people sleeping out on the city's streets every night. And of course, that doesn't even include the people who were in shelters. Today, there are only about 400. How has the city managed to decrease that number so sharply?
The changes that were made starting in 2009, when the community moved from coordinating services and managing homelessness to now building a system to end homelessness. And with that, we've been able to initiate certain concepts. Number one, the housing first approach, where people deserve to have a home. They are housing ready. What we found by using a housing first approach is that, number one, people can solve their problems better when they're in their own house. Number two, it's much more economical to provide services under that umbrella.
So what are the tangible changes that the county's implemented by moving from managing to ending homelessness?
Well, number one, lower barriers to housing. Number two, moving people into housing as quickly as possible. We try to do it in 30 days or less. Number three, people will always need the support of income. Here at the Sullivan Jackson Employment Center, we are great champions of people being allowed the opportunities to go into our community and find full-time work and become sustainable in their housing because of that employment.
Federal funding for homeless programs across the country has doubled since the beginning of the Obama administration. Is there any danger of that funding being cut once Obama leaves office, and what effect would a cut have on programs here?
I think that you always have to be concerned during the Obama administration and with the amendments to McKinney-Vento, ending homelessness, of course, meant housing. And that's why the budgets have increased. And of course, if that money declines, then the housing units this community will have in order to place homeless people in so they can stabilize their lives and become unsubsidized housing when they go to work at the job, that'll diminish. And so with those opportunities that we have moving people quickly to housing won't be there as they are right now.
What could the community be doing to better serve its homeless population?
I think the community is very supportive. When we had the street count this year, I think we had something like 300 volunteers. It was the most we've ever had. I think right around 300. The faith community, of course, is always there to provide food, housing, emergency beds in cold winter nights. Winter shelter is still alive and running in Tucson. Not as big as it was, but it's still there. And I think in general, people in Tucson understand that couple, if they lost their job and they're a couple paychecks away from maybe sleeping in their car too. There was a real eye-opener for us when the recession hit, and we saw so many families that for the first time had run out of support systems, and they too were facing living in their car, living at shelters, and a lot of them never thought that would happen to them.
Of course, there are many services available for homeless people around Pima County. Yes. Do you think that the homeless population is fully aware of them? And also, do you think that the community at large is aware of all the services that are available?
I think that we do a very good job of putting the information out to people who want it. There are a number of nonprofits in this town who sole function is to let everyone know. Our outreach teams, our coordinated entry teams will also be involved in letting people in Tucson and Pima County know we have services if they're experiencing homelessness.
Do you think there will be a day that we've managed to eliminate homelessness in our community?
No. But I think what we'll be able to do is to address the problem quicker and keep it from reoccurring. And with those goals, I think that you'll not see the poverty-related homelessness, the people walking in the parks all the time and flying their signs and that.
Could you tell me a little bit about the Sullivan Jackson program? What's your mission here?
To provide workshops to people experiencing homelessness, both individuals, families, youth, veterans, and support them in their endeavors of finding and securing full-time employment. We feel that a job is the best way to stabilize your housing. And we believe that that will lead to unsubsidized housing as people move ahead in their work. And we're a part of the Pima County One-Stop System, so as people become employed and their housing crisis is stabilized and they are working, we can refer them to other aspects of the One-Stop System where they can get additional training, maybe start making some more money at work, move up to a different position. The training doesn't just stop here. It can move on even if they're not homeless. The One-Stop System is here to help the population of Pima County improve their skills in the workplace.
Could you give me an idea of what a typical day at the Sullivan Jackson Center is like for someone in the program?
I don't know if there's typical days, but I think a lot of people, when they first come to the workshops and they think, I don't know if this is going to work for me. I've been living outside for 6 months, and now I have to be at school on time. We emulate the world of work. But when they graduate 2 weeks later and they're coming to work here in a suit and tie, and they're planning their days, and they're directing their job search activities, their self-worth, self-esteem, there's things that they can do now, they can grasp physically and understand that they can change their life now. They can get off the street, they can get a job, they can have their own house. And it really changes people once you start believing in yourself again.
Could you give me some examples of the jobs that your graduates go on to get?
Our graduates go on the market. That means anything that's open in City of Tucson or Pima County, and they have the qualifications, and they have a way of finding out where those openings are when they use their self-directed job search methodology. So when they walk into a business, they don't walk in with a sign on them that says, "I'm homeless, give me a job." They walk in a suit and tie saying, "I'm here, I'm qualified." That's how, so every job. And I mean, we're talking from the University of Arizona all the way to Circle K.
Now we'll hear from a man who's been homeless since late last year and recently found his way to the Sullivan Jackson Employment Center.
Good afternoon. My name is Pat Atzman. When it's convenient, can you please return my call? I became homeless about 5-6 months ago. About 5 weeks ago, I came into this program, did the 2-week initial training class, so to speak. And that was actually a lot of fun. Frank was my instructor. And after that, I've been hitting the pavement on a daily basis. Well, basically, back in class, we came up with 3 job titles that we wanted. It was a process. My top 3 were data entry clerk, number 1. Number 2 was customer sales rep. And number 3 was cook. Good afternoon. May I please get the name of the person that does the hiring? I'm not looking really for a job, per se. I'm looking for a career. And that's kind of like what this has taught me, is that jobs are a dime a dozen, to an extent. But if I want to find something that's rewarding for myself, I got to put a little effort into it and make sure, it's right for me. Right now I'm looking at the hotel industry in the book. There's basically 2, customer service rep, or even if they have data entry, they really don't, but a cook. Like the last one, no, we don't have any sale, open for front desk, but hey, we got a cook. So that's still, to me, hey, it's one of my 3. I'm just looking for something that's secure, that's gonna make sure it pays my bills. I have a little extra to have some comfort. Wherever that may be, I don't know, but I'm willing to try as many facets as I have. I've got experiences tons of different places, so anything's possible. Like I had an interview earlier today, prior to this, at a hotel for a night auditor. And hopefully, you know, she said, we'll probably call you on Tuesday for a second interview. Things are definitely looking up. That little light at the back of the tunnel that everyone says they see, well, it's not that faint anymore. It's very bright. All right, bye-bye. You too, bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Rivera. Tonight on Arizona Week, El Nino, the climate phenomenon, baffling predictions.
From Texas over to Florida has done well. We're in the donut hole of the expected El Nino impacts right now.
Now our Journalist Roundtable. Joining me in the studio today, my colleague at Arizona Public Media, Nancy Montoya, and Dylan Smith of the Tucson Sentinel. Thank you both for being here. Late last year, the city adopted new rules on where homeless people can stay and sleep and how much stuff they can have with them. Also, they are now requiring that organizations that go to parks to distribute food get health permits. Dylan, can you talk a little bit about what the motivation was for those rule changes?
Well, really, politically, the new rules came about because of Safe Park, and then the aftermath of that, where people were no longer in Safe Park, camped out downtown, but camping on the sidewalks with lots of camping gear and shelters that they had built, some shelters that had been brought in for them. And you know, that created a little bit of a political firestorm.
No kidding.
And also, you know, it really, in some spots, actually did start to block the sidewalk and make it difficult for people to get around. So to basically put a stop to that, these new set of rules were instituted, which really aren't that much different than some rules that the city had, and then there was a bit of court fight about them, and then that was sort of that court fight was the reason that all of this was dragged out for so many months.
Yeah, and I'll just go over those rules, actually, the new rules. People can now have a maximum of 4 cubic feet with them, and that includes their backpacks or bikes or whatever. They can be in the parks from from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., and then on the sidewalks from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. The Parks and Rec is the entity that hands out the health permits. So if people are interested in going and giving food to the homeless, head to the Parks and Rec. Nancy, Steve Nelson in my interview mentioned the work of faith-based organizations in serving the homeless. I saw some of that firsthand. I spent a night recently at the Salvation Army's hospitality house for a story. There were volunteers there distributing food, cutting people's hair, and of course it was a warm place for people to stay that night. Can you talk a little bit about sort of what are the other services that faith-based organizations and non-governmental organizations are providing?
We live in a very, very generous community, and especially when it comes to the faith-based communities, they talk to each other. The Methodists talk to the Catholics talk to the Presbyterians. There's real coordination within the faith-based communities, and they help each other out. Now, a faith-based community efforts really go into the basic needs, shelter, food, clothing. Some of them do some job training and some job placement, but basically it is the basic needs immediately. And if a homeless person finds themselves out there and doesn't know where to go, head for the nearest church, because Tucson is a very generous place. There is a couple of people in Tucson who I think are really the champions of solving homelessness or working on that, and that's Nancy Bissell and Gordon Packer. Back in the early 80s, they opened up a soup kitchen, St. Martin's or San Martin's if you speak Spanish, and it was later forced closed by a lawsuit by the neighborhood, but that was how Primavera started. And you know, Primavera now is the premier homeless agency in town.
Right. You've, of course, been here in Tucson for many years.
Right.
Have you noticed a change in the attitudes of the community, in the community's attitudes towards homelessness?
Yeah, big changes. In 2006, there was this huge statewide effort. It was called the Arizona Coalition to End Homelessness. And it was made up of about 60 to 80 organizations, including governmental organizations. And that's the first time in Arizona, and specifically in Pima County, where groups really started to coalesce and work together. And now I just did a little bit of research on it before we came here, and it seems like Tucson is doing one heck of a job with not ending homelessness. I think one of your guests said that you will never end homelessness, but we've got a leg up on it.
Right, and the goal is, of course, to end it if possible, as much as
Absolutely.
possible. I want to switch to another topic that you've been reporting about this week pretty extensively, the role of Latinos in this election cycle. How important would you say is the Latino vote in Arizona and here in Pima County?
It's critical. Arizona right now is about 30% Latinos. We're thinking that maybe 20% of those will actually vote. And it's critical. It can tip an election either way. We are seeing more and more Latinos sign up. They usually lean more Democrat than they do Republican. But we are seeing a real surge in Republican registrations for the Latino community. And it's crucial, especially in those tight races, it can be the difference between winning and losing.
Right. And you reported, one of your stories was about the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda, an organization that was created in 1991 to really create a unified voice for the Latino community. How effective has their effort been, and is there really such a thing as a unified Latino voice in terms of voting?
There really isn't. I mean, there's a couple of things that coalesce the Hispanic or the Latino vote. One, of course, is the language. Secondly is the sense of family and cultural traditions. That really unifies. But you have Puerto Ricans and Cubans down in Florida, lots of Mexican Americans in the Southwest. Puerto Ricans and Cubans tend to lean more Republican. Mexican Americans tend to lean a little bit more Democrat. But I think that NALA, which is the organization you were talking about, they've been very effective. They've been able to register at least another 300,000 Latinos across the country. And this is, again, a coalition of 30 major Hispanic groups. And in fact, on election night, they have a toll-free number that you can call in if you have any problems at the voting booth.
Oh, wow.
Attorneys will be there to help.
Great, yeah.
The Latino vote is still, Latino voters, I should say, are still underrepresented on the rolls. There's not the same number who are actually even registered to vote, and then they often not turn out. So it's even once you get somebody signed up, they still have to go and actually show up and cast a ballot, and that's been a real challenge just here in Arizona because they tend to lean towards the Democratic Party. For the Democrats to try and get them to turn out has been a big uphill battle.
The Latino population skewers very young too, and we have a lot of problems regardless of culture or race across all lines getting young people to vote. Many of the Latino leaders say that problem's going to fix itself as these people get older, get more vested in the community, have families, have things that they really care about. But face it, many young people don't vote.
It is true that people in their early 20s usually don't bother.
That's true.
They've got other things going on.
That's true.
And in other election news, Arizona's presidential preference election is, of course, this Tuesday. Dylan, will the results on Tuesday actually matter?
Well, we'll have to see. Really, it's still important for people to show up and participate in the process, even if ultimately a couple more delegates either way don't make a difference. But we're seeing some pretty close races on both ballots amongst the Republicans and the Democratic Party, even as the fields have been winnowed, and there are some people who are a little bit irked that they have already cast an early ballot in what is basically Arizona's presidential primary, and their candidate is already pulled out of the race in the span of the past month. But still, looking at what the narrow margin might end up being once the political conventions roll around, a couple more delegates here and there, and that's why you're seeing campaigns really start to look at not just Arizona, where a number of the candidates are decided that this weekend is they're
This
going to
weekend's
show
big
up
for 'em.
in Arizona to try and turn out the vote for them. But they've got, people looking at, what's going on in places where there are just a couple of delegates, and, the Marianas Islands, where there's not, usually that would get completely ignored and no one would even really do anything. But now they're actually, trying to hire, and get a couple people trying to turn out the vote there.
And speaking of making appearances, Bernie Sanders is really the only candidate that's come to Pima County to make a big election appearance. Is that an indication? Can we take that to mean that Pima County really isn't a priority for the candidates? It's not really in play?
Well, candidates really have to triage their time and attention, and I think the Sanders campaign sees Tucson as some pretty ripe territory for them. And to make 2 visits here over the past several months is a pretty big investment of a candidate's time. And then you've got most of the other candidates really looking at Phoenix, where you have a larger population, a larger media market, and potentially more impact by making that kind of appearance. Which is why Clinton will be going to Phoenix rather than making a stop down here in what is pretty. I guess you could call this a liberal town.
Right.
I think most of us know that.
Tucson and Pima County have been called the Berkeley of Arizona, so we've got a lot of Birkenstockers here, and that seems to be Bernie Sanders' right kind of audience. And I think that we're going to see some interesting numbers coming out for Bernie Sanders.
And I want to ask you both, actually, just for your predictions for how Tuesday will come out. What will the results be on Tuesday?
Well, I think Hillary's going to take it on the Democrat side, and probably Mr. Trump will win out in Tucson. I think all of the early indicators are saying that he's running very strong in Arizona.
The polling that we've seen on both sides, it's pretty clear that both Clinton and Trump have a pretty solid lead in Arizona. But you've got the other candidates at least trying to peel back a few more delegates, and it's really not about how many primary elections you win at this point. It's about how many delegates you rack up. So even if you lose, if you can still get a few in Arizona and a few here and there, and still. You have to win somewhere, sometime, and come ahead with more. But it could be, we could be still talking about what's going on in the presidential primary race when June rolls around, when California is still open.
And Ted Cruz is heading down to the border on Saturday, so he's making a stop in southern Arizona.
Yep. And just a reminder that the Republican side is winner take all in Arizona.
Right.
Correct. Another reminder, the deadline to vote by mail has already passed, so voters in Arizona should remember to get to their polling stations.
I got to tell my son that.
There you go.
Or you can drop them at an early polling place. If you have a mail-in ballot that you want to get turned in, you can take it in on Tuesday or drop it off.
And it's any polling place, isn't it?
On Monday as well.
Great. Now moving on to another story out of Pima County this week, the news that the Board of Supervisors adopted a paid leave plan for parents. Dylan, can you tell us a little bit about the plan and how that came about?
Yeah, it was plenty of back and forth with a couple of the unions for county workers who were really pushing for this, and they were really wanting to have a 100% paid leave plan, and that got dialed back a little bit. It offers new parents and parents of a newly adopted child the opportunity to take up to 6 weeks of paid leave, but at 66% of their pay instead of full pay. And they can backfill some of that with using up some of their other paid time off that they have to try and augment their pay. And
Nancy, how does this compare to the plan that the U of A introduced in 2014?
It's similar. Okay. It's very similar. Back to the county, the vote came right down on party lines. You had the Democrats saying, yes, we definitely need it, and we had Allie Miller, who was vehemently against it, and Ray Carroll to a lesser degree. But I think one of the facts that people don't understand is that it's a long-range kind of thing. When you spend more time with your child, the first 6 weeks are crucial. A lot of neat things happen. Bonding happens, and down the road, that bonding eventually means a better way to bond with other people. So it's not just dollars and cents. It's the future of our community, too.
And in the last few seconds here, is there any momentum, this is for both of you, is there any momentum for the city of Tucson to implement a similar plan? I haven't
You know,
heard.
the city's been running into a few walls with both plans that they've, floated for better employee benefits for their employees and for all employees across the city. And given the state of the city's budget right now, where we're still trying to fill a hole and, cutting police and fire and probably every other department, spending another $500,000 on something like this is probably, at this point, a non-starter.
Not in the cards immediately.
All right, well, that's all we have time for. Thank you both for being here today. Andrea Kelly will be back next week. Thanks for watching.